Our topics include environmental issues, nurses and the law, and youth and politics in Germany. William Ruckelshaus, who has an honorary degree from Ball State University and twice headed the Environmental Protection Agency, was in Muncie to talk about environmental issues. He shares his views in an interview prior to his talk. Mr. Ruckelshaus, it's been reported by the Office of Technology Assessment, the research arm of Congress, that there may be at least 10,000 hazardous waste sites in the United States that pose a serious threat to public health. Why have these sites been allowed to continue?
Well, under the Superfund, there are two kinds of programs that EPA has. One is the alleviation of an immediate health threat. They have done that at over 700 sites around the country. Any time that they are alerted to an immediate, imminent health threat to the public that surrounds one of these sites, they can move in tomorrow in a 24-hour period to clean it up. Most of these sites where they have not been totally cleaned up, the figure 6 that the magazine article indicates and has been floating around, are sites that in some instances will never be cleaned up in the sense that you will have completely eliminated the risk. Some of them have a constant leaching into the groundwater supply, which necessitates pumping it out. So in that case, they'll never be cleaned up. That's the chronic kind of health problem, which the vast majority of these Superfund sites represent.
How about the Seymour dump and other hazardous waste sites in Indiana?
Well, you know, how about them? They're Superfund sites. To the extent there was an immediate health threat, again, the agency tried to move in along with the state as quickly as they could to alleviate that. And then the question is, what do you do about this chronic long-term threat associated with the continued contamination of the groundwater or the surrounding land? And that's what takes longer to clean up.
You are now with Union Carbide, is that correct, or a consultant for them? Is
I am doing a study for the company as to what happened at the Institute West Virginia plant and why.
This caused great concern in that immediate area and throughout the country, of course, because of the problem in India. Do other large chemical producing plants pose a threat to communities in which they're located? Do we know of other weak areas?
Well, I mean, I'm not personally familiar with other weak areas. There is no way to operate any kind of major manufacturing facility without some risk. That risk, of course, increases as the substances you're handling are themselves toxic, whether in a volatile form, in the form of gas, or whether as a pollutant, liquid, or even solid. But it is possible to operate those facilities so as to greatly minimize that risk. And the result of Bhopal and the result of Institute and other kind of incidents, I think, has galvanized most of the chemical industries in this country to take a very serious look at their installations and determine what they can do to make it safe, both from the standpoint of concern about their own employees and the surrounding community and their own liability.
When these incidents happen, we always hear conflicting reports as to accountability. There was a delay in warnings and so forth. What seems to be the problem? Don't we have an alerting system for a community that's adjacent to a dangerous situation?
In some cases we do, some cases we don't. Obviously the system that was in place in Institute didn't work perfectly. There were 135 people sent to the hospital. And even more obviously, the system that was in Bhopal was deficient. So that while those systems are in place, unless there is a constant monitoring of that system, a constant reinforcing of it in the minds of the people running the plant and the local community, and an understanding of how that system works, it can fall into disrepair as nothing happens over a period of years. People simply forget what the system is all about unless you constantly call their attention to it.
And of course, crying wolf too is dangerous. Unless they're sure that a serious or dangerous situation exists, false alarms.
Yeah, that is a problem, or it could become a problem, certainly in a reaction to these other incidents, that people would trigger the alarm system so quickly in order to avoid the charge that they had not properly used it. that they would begin to develop an immunity in the community to these alarms. That's the problem with the cry-wolf syndrome. But I would guess in the immediate future at least, if there's going to be any erring on the part of these companies, it's going to be erring on the side of blowing the whistle first and then later finding out whether they needed to do it.
Like doctors taking all the tests?
Sure, and the liability is what's driving it as much as anything.
Can you discuss your work with Union Carbide?
Well, I'm a lawyer with them. I have, along with their board, put together a group of consultants, which really are as fine as can be found in the world, to take a look at that installation and try to make some judgments as to assist them as to what happened and why. And as a lawyer, and the communication with the board is a privilege, their privilege to waive or not to communication.
Does most of your legal work and that of your firm deal with environmental issues?
No, it really doesn't. Some of it does. The firm I'm with is 190 lawyers, so they're involved in all kinds of things, and where they were by no means exclusively an environmental or even predominantly an environmental firm when I joined them.
This may be an oversimplification, but 15 years ago, Governor Tom McCall of Oregon, with the backing of his state legislature, got tough with violators, and some of them went to jail, and he cleaned up the Columbia River and tributaries and other streams in Oregon. Why can't we apply this same pressure?
It is being applied. The laws are being enforced. People are being put in jail. It isn't just as simple as that. It isn't just, you can't put everybody who ever discharged anything wrongly into a stream or into the air in jail. The enforcement system of the country isn't ever going to be big enough to do that. And part of what happened in Oregon was good. Tom McCall was a tough individual on this whole issue of the environment. It reflected the attitude of the people living in Oregon. They still have pollution problems in Oregon. Their problems aren't over any more than they are in the state of Washington or any place else in the country. And those problems are associated with the same level of complexity of what level of pollution should we deem acceptable, how far down should we drive emission levels, whether in the air or in the water, in what time frame, at what cost, and under what set of economic conditions. Those are the kind of social policies, social problems that people have to weigh in deciding what to do about the environment. It's going on in Oregon just like it is everywhere else.
What, in your opinion, is the most single or perhaps a group of threatening environmental problems, such as acid rain and so forth?
The toxic waste problem in this country is far and away the biggest single environmental problem we have today, both from the production of those substances to their transportation, their use, and ultimate disposal. And we've got the problem of the careless, by the whole society, really careless disposal of toxic waste in the past. We're trying to clean that up. That's the Superfund problem. We're finding it enormously complex and expensive to get it done. And then we're trying to put this sort of proactive set of regulations, rules in place for the control of toxic substances from the cradle to the grave. This is a very expensive proposition, very disruptive, very emotional to the society, and it's going to take us a while to get on top of it. I'm confident that we now have the rules in place to do that, but it'll be a decade hence before I can sit down here talking to you saying this one's behind us.
Fairly or unfairly, the present administration comes under fire for not expressing enough concern over environmental issues. Would you like to clarify that?
Well, if the charge is they don't express enough concern, I think that's probably right. They don't talk about the environment very much. Usually when they do, they get in trouble, so they'd stop talking about it. But the truth is, a lot of what has been going on in terms of trying to alleviate pollution in these regulatory agencies in the government has continued to go on as it has in the past. We had the upheaval at EPA, which led to my return, which was a bad situation. There's no question about it. I think EPA is now in good shape. It's wrestling with a bunch of intractable problems where they've been given assignments that people want concluded tomorrow as opposed to a week or a month from now when it's more realistic to expect they'll be concluded. But they're doing fine. There are a lot of good people there working hard, and they're slowly but surely getting on top of these problems.
Edna Cooke is an Indianapolis registered nurse with a law degree. And at a Ball State nursing seminar, she stresses the importance of nurses keeping accurate, detailed records. Ms. Cooke, we hear of doctors being involved in malpractice suits, but seldom other members of the medical profession. Is it fairly common or becoming more common, say, for nurses or lab technicians or other people becoming involved?
I think we're seeing more and more litigation being filed against all healthcare providers. And in most instances, a lawsuit won't be filed just against the doctor. It'll be filed against the doctor and the hospital where the patient was hospitalized. Seldom are the nurses individually named, but we're seeing more often that nurses are individually named. But they are brought into the lawsuits because the hospital is named as a defendant, and of course, they are the persons that were giving care there.
And they would be called into the courtroom
Absolutely.
for testimony.
Absolutely.
And you gave some very good presentations. It's a frightening experience for a novice, is it not?
It's very frightening. I mean, even being an attorney, to sit on the witness stand is very intimidating, even being familiar with those surroundings. But for a nurse or someone who's not familiar with the courtroom to suddenly be called upon to explain what they did to a patient, how they documented it, why this patient died is very, very frightening and intimidating, yes. And usually they're testifying about it several years after it occurred.
So you were encouraging them to, I suppose, keep good records.
Absolutely. To document completely what they were seeing with the patient, what they were doing with the patient, not only to be better able to defend themselves or to testify about the care they gave, but also so that the care which is being given to the patient is perhaps better and the communication within the hospital while the patient is still there is improved.
As busy as they are, is this practical?
I think it's practical. I don't think that we can get to the ideal of the documentation we'd like to see, but I think we can get a lot farther than what we are. I think one of the things that I told the nurses is I think that if you kind of change your method of charting and think more about what you're recording and get into the habit of charting more descriptively, that you can do it and it's not going to be that much more time consuming.
So it would be in the chart itself?
In the patient's record, that's right.
In the records, so that they wouldn't have to keep a separate record?
No, I'm talking about in the patient's record.
In the patient's records, And how about if they observe something that they don't think is quite correct on the part of a doctor or a technician or whosoever in the structure? Should they make a personal note of that?
Well, it depends upon the situation. If they see something that they are concerned about, that they think perhaps something is being done incorrectly to the patient by another member of the health care team, then, most hospitals have a procedure whereby they can notify their supervisors, an investigation can be done and that sort of thing. As far as whether or not it actually needs to be documented on the patient record would depend upon, the situation and what action was taken. But yeah, I don't think that they can ignore a problem if they see it. I think they have a duty to the patient, if nothing else, to identify that problem and bring it to someone's attention.
Most healthcare professionals receive, well, you're very aware of this, mail all the time. Protect yourself up to $700,000, $1 million, $5 million, and so forth. Yet here in Indiana, and I think it's since 1975, we've had a law that restricts the liability of a medical team to $100,000 per individual. Is that correct?
That's correct. You're limited to $100,000 per healthcare provider, and then a patient can recover up to an additional $400,000 from the patient's compensation fund, which is part of the Department of Insurance. So the maximum recovery in Indiana is $500,000.
Is that a good law?
I think from the standpoint of a healthcare provider, it's an excellent law. It's very, very protective of healthcare providers, in the state. I think that our act is working. I think that it goes to a medical review panel proceeding here in the state, which is supposed to act as like a screening mechanism of the malpractice suits, even though it doesn't preclude them from filing the suit in court later. And I think, it's serving its function in that regard. Whether or not an overall cap of $500,000 is sufficient in every medical malpractice case is difficult to say.
But the law has stood the test of time.
Yes, it's been in effect for 10 years, and our courts have repeatedly upheld it.
And we hear of, I don't know if they're outrageous settlements, they're certainly very large settlements, especially on either coast, east and west. They don't seem to be quite as large in the midsection of the country for some reason.
Well, of course, this section of the country is much more conservative, and a jury, even in a state like Iowa, is much less likely to return a $3 or $4 million verdict than a jury out in California, which is, a much more liberal state. It's just that here in Indiana, the legislators decided that they were going to impose a cap and not let the jury, go beyond that.
Is Indiana the only state to have this kind of a law?
I believe that it's not the only state to have this type of law. The only other state that is as restrictive as Indiana, I believe, is Nebraska, and it's patterned after our law. Other states do have malpractice acts, though, which provide additional protection to healthcare providers and have some cap on the damages.
We were one of the first.
Yes, and
Why?
one of the most protective.
Why?
I think it's because we're a conservative state. I think it's because our legislators decided that there really was some jeopardy to our healthcare system, and they were going to protect it. And so they drafted a law which was going to decrease insurance premiums to doctors, and which would decrease the cost being passed along to patients and protect our system.
Do you foresee a federal law of this kind?
That would be reaching into the states. I doubt it. I think it's something more that needs to be addressed individually by the states, which they have done. 10 years ago, almost all of the states enacted some sort of legislature like this. A lot of them have been struck down now as being unconstitutional, but I think with the information we're receiving now about, again, a rise in medical malpractice suits, that some of the states may again start looking at their malpractice acts and deciding whether something else needs to be done to protect the healthcare providers.
You're a lawyer.
Yes.
And a registered nurse.
Yes.
Which came first?
Registered nurse.
Registered nurse. In your case, you thought a legal background would be helpful, or that's something that you wanted to acquire. Do you think that our curriculum should be changed to include more legal aspects of the medical care field?
Well, I think, I know that when I was in nursing school and seeing some of the programs that are, in other universities as far as the education that nurses receive, we hear a lot about legal aspects, but I don't think it is ever completely drilled into our heads how significant it can be. So, without seeing what the program is at any particular university, it's difficult to evaluate it. I don't know if the answer is in, more of it within the university or in seminars such as this that maybe are postgraduate after they've been out there practicing nursing and can better appreciate the situations they're faced with. I don't think when you're a student you really realize what it's like to be a nurse and be in that stressful situation and have to document what you've done.
Sure. Have there been many nurses involved in litigation as individuals?
As individuals within this state, no. There aren't that many that have been individually named, but again, there have been a lot of them that have been involved because of the hospitals.
What were some of the concerns expressed by those attending the workshop?
Well, I think primarily some of the things that I usually see, if I document this in a certain manner, am I being descriptive enough? Am I telling enough about the patient? What risks do I have personally in being involved in a malpractice suit? What sort of questions would be asked of me if I were called upon to testify? What should I do in the situation like you talked about? If I see someone doing something, should I report it and that sort of thing? I think it's concerns not only about being involved in litigation, but, also concerns about the patient and legally where do they stand in taking actions or certain actions.
Are people less reluctant now to seek other alternatives than the legal process?
We have a very litigious society. I think that a few years ago or several years ago, people just simply did not sue their doctors. You just didn't do that. And I think that now the pattern is pretty much that almost everyone thinks it's okay to do that. In the smaller communities, I think it's less likely to occur because you're going to have to go to that county hospital for medical treatment or go to your family doctor. In the larger cities, it's anonymous. It's a huge emergency room. It's a doctor you may never see again, or it's a specialist that's been called in on your case, and people view it as not having that close relationship and deciding that it's okay to sue. So, it's our society. We're very litigious. We like to sue for car accidents. We like to sue for a lot of things, and medical malpractice, unfortunately, is just becoming very commonplace and very accepted. And it's making the standards upon doctors and hospitals much, much more stringent. I think there's real positive positive things that come out of it. I think, you know, it makes healthcare providers look more at what they're doing and why they're doing it. So I think there's real positive aspects of it, but people are, you know, feel much more free about suing than they used to.
Dr. Heinrich Oberreuter, political science chairman at Passau University in Germany and Ball State lecturer, talks with us about the political attitudes of youth in the Federal Republic of Germany. Dr. Oberreuter, what is the political attitude of the youth in Germany?
Difficult to say. The political attitude of the youth in Germany is they are all in favor of democracy. They are all in favor of liberal freedoms, civil rights and so. But I think they are not in favor becoming politically involved. There is no great or bigger political participation. The normal attitude of the youth in Germany, as it is in the United States also, is political apathy.
You don't have the political demonstrations by youth in your country?
Yes, we have political demonstrations by youth in our country, but we must say that that are minorities, political minorities with a high political consciousness and inclined to actions, to discussions, to demonstrations, inclined to a new spontaneous way of politics, but they are a minority. They are not the youth, the entire youth.
What are your recognized minorities politically?
What are recognized minorities?
Yes, what are your political minorities?
No, our political minorities are, I think, especially organized in the party of the Greens.
Are they a violent party, the Greens?
I don't think you can say they are a violent party, but they have a problem with violence as a means of political of the political process. They haven't cleared their position on that issue, and they also have some open questions on the side of parliamentary and representative democracy. They cannot answer these questions, I think basic questions, because they would become disintegrated in their party, because they also have minorities in these green minorities belonging to an extreme left wing.
Well, we would call splinter groups.
Yes, splitter groups, but the interesting fact is that this party consists out of splitter groups.
The Green Party.
The Green Party. All parties are pluralistic, but all parties normally have a platform, an ideological platform shared by the members.
The Green Party gaining strength in your country?
I don't think so. The Green Party is in a crucial situation in the moment. Maybe that they will not be re-elected in the Bundestag in the next general elections 1987. They don't get stronger.
How about the recent acts of terrorism in your country, the bombings and other acts?
I think nobody who is in the possess of reason can be for bombing and for terrorism, and the Germans think these actions are crimes and should be punished as crimes, and they cannot be justified by political positions and political terms.
What groups do you think are perpetrating these acts of terrorism?
I think these groups or these persons joining in such actions, these groups are especially left-wing terrorists, descendants of the old RAF of Baader Meinhof and so, and I think this is a left-wing orientated terrorism, but we have also small groups or single persons of an extreme right-wing position dealing with those actions. But the bombings, the terrorism, especially against equipments and persons of the American forces, this terrorism is a left-wing terrorism.
We read occasionally in the American news about the resurgence of the Nazi Party and attempts to revive it. Are they very strong?
No. We have one we have one right-wing political party, the so-called National Democratic Party, which is in favor of very rightist positions, but this party has only 6,700. I should repeat, 6,700 members, and this party is gaining only about 0.2% in the general elections. I think this party is no serious danger for democracy.
Is this the party that resembles the Nazi Party, or is it just an extreme right group?
No, this is a party which is called the Nazi Party revived.
Does the government has laws forbidding the resurgence of the Nazi Party?
The government could put the question to the federal court, to the federal constitutional court, to forbid this party. We did so in 1952. In this year, the Federal Constitutional Court forbids the Communist Party of Germany and also the Socialist Empire Party, Sozialistische Reichspartei, an organization and successor organization of the Nazi Party. But since this time we are not in favor of these political instruments. We think we must discuss the problems. I think these are political questions, and we should deal with them publicly, and we should isolate these movements publicly.
Does the average German, the man in the street, seem optimistic about the forthcoming summit meeting between President Reagan and Premier Oberreuter?
I don't think, I don't know if he is looking optimistically. I think he is looking with hopes. The Germans and the Europeans, as the Americans, I think too, are inclined to see results. They want to see results of these negotiations, and I think there must be results because we cannot go on with arms race in such a measure as in the last years because our economical systems are stressed.